Call the meeting to order. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We have two public hearings scheduled tonight, one for the proposed tax rates for the calendar year 2016, and the other for the operating and capital budgets. Allison, do you know whether people are signing up separately?
Yes, sir.
All right. Okay. We will open the first public hearing on the proposed tax rates.
Mr. Chair, we have one individual signed up to speak during this public hearing, Marshall McDaniel, resident of Orange County.
Okay.
Good evening, I'm Marshall McDaniel, 11562 Walters Road, Orange, Virginia. I'm here tonight to address the boards in reference to the recent proposed personal property tax change, specifically the removal of the tax on the aircraft. This is not a new issue. As an owner of a RV camping trailer, we pay $2.62 per hundred, as you well know. In the past, airplane owners have paid 70 cents a hundred, I believe it is. I'm opposed to the residents who have aircraft paying no personal property tax at all on them. I have read the explanation offered by the county administrator, I believe in the Daily Progress and several other publications. And I really am the explanation offered was nothing more than a theory of what may happen should the tax be removed. I didn't really see any substantial data to indicate that if we remove the tax, we're gonna recoup that $25,000 in services and or sale of fuel. In looking at the sale of fuel, I know they were talking about it, and I believe the numbers I looked at, they sold roughly $50,000 worth of profit on the fuel last year for the airport, and at that rate, you know, they'd have to sell another 50% more in order to recoup that money that we'd be losing. The other thing, corporations and businesses usually lease or charter their aircraft as opposed to owning them. So I really don't buy into the fact of it's a big selling point where it may be, but I don't buy into the point where it's a big selling point to attract commercial or corporations with aircraft to come into Orange and put their airplane in our hangar, and we're going to see a substantial gain from that. It doesn't seem logical that a corporation wouldn't use the facility due to the personal property tax on their aircraft if it logistically was advantageous for them. I don't think that's a prime factor that they look at. Besides that, I'm sure that they're well versed enough in the tax laws to have the plane registered in another company name or a holding company to ensure the maximum benefit for their corporation. Again, the sale of fuel and airport services is another point that's mostly speculative in nature. The airport would have to sell, like I said, 50% more fuel to get to even ground, and you know, that can be a hard sell. The county administrator also stated that the loss of tax revenue would likely produce a benefit instead. Obviously, if you sell 50% more fuel, that's going to be a benefit, so I really can't argue that point, nor would I. I think maybe what I'm looking for is not the fact that I pay more tax than they would on their airplane. It's just the fact that maybe every resident should have the same personal property tax rate on all of their luxury or recreational, and I'll term them as toys because, like I said, I'm a camper owner myself. It's not something I have to have, but it's a convenience. And to me, that might make the most sense, and basically leave the fundraising, so to speak, for the economy and the businesses to the Economic Development Authority. You know, I think any person that's been in business long enough, I know Mr. Johnson has a business. Several of you have been involved in business. When when you venture out and you create all these things, they kind of have to stand on their own. You can't, take from one and expect it to pay for the other, once it gets up and running. And that would make the most sense to me, to look at this, $2.62 a hundred on RVs, $2.09 a hundred on boats, and nothing on airplanes. That's kind of going lopsided. I think, if Mr. White remembers, I think during election time, we had that discussion.
We did.
And, I said, this just doesn't make equitable sense. So I guess all I'm asking for is for the board to take a look at it, to try to even the scales a little bit. Naturally, I also think that, like the average lay person, if you can afford an airplane, Lord knows you should be able to afford the tax on it. If not, you need to be looking at your financials. Because, when you spend $300,000, does $2,100 in tax, is that gonna break the bank? So, I will have to say in closing that, I think the airport is a fine facility. It certainly looks good. The additions and capital outlay is clearly seen there. And I think there may come a time when it could, benefit the county in a large way. But I don't think that, a couple $1,000s in personal property tax is going to necessarily turn it into a moneymaker for the county. I just don't see it happening. I mean, we all know the history of the airport. I think it's closer this year to being a profitable venture than it's ever been. When we're putting $152,000 out of the general fund over into the airport fund to balance their fund budget, that $25,000 in personal property taxes would go quite a bit of ways. I just can't see when we're supplementing it to give up money that we're already getting, just to say, well, we have the potential to maybe go out here and get some other industry. I just don't think that's a deciding factor on that. So, if I have any questions of me or anything I said, I certainly.
Thank you, Mr. McDaniel. Appreciate your comments.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you, sir.
No further speakers for that public hearing.
We will close the public hearing on the tax rates. And now we'll open the public hearing on the proposed operating and capital budgets for the fiscal year 2016. Speakers signed up?
Yes, sir, we have two speakers. First is Jim Hopkins, 135 Green Street, and a member of the school board.
Good evening. I'm proud and honored to serve as District 5's representative on the Orange County School Board. The opinions I express tonight are my own and should not be interpreted as a position of the Orange County School Board. The Orange County Public Schools has a lot to be proud of, and this would not be possible without your continued support for a quality school system. Orange County citizens can take pride in the fact that all of our schools are fully accredited without warning. This is far from a trivial statement, sorry for the wording problem, because this accomplishment has been attained and it has eluded all of our adjacent counties. Our school system has achieved this feat and at the same time has one of the lowest per pupil spending rates compared to our adjacent counties. In short, the Commonwealth of Virginia has affirmed we do it better than our adjacent counties, and amazingly, we do it with less money. The school system receives a majority of its funds from two sources, the state and the Board of Supervisors. 4 years ago, the school board adopted a 5-year salary improvement plan to make our teacher salaries more competitive with our adjacent counties. I want to thank you for your support for the first 3 years of this salary improvement plan. However, it became abundantly clear when the county administrator released his proposed budget for this year, there were insufficient funds for the 4th year of the salary improvement plan. Although I was disappointed in the county administrator's budget, I was not surprised because the school board knew the salary improvement plan would be a long-term goal. It appears the 5-year salary improvement plan may now take 7 or 8 years to complete. It is important to remind everyone that our adjacent counties are not standing still waiting for us to catch up. The state's budget for next year includes an average 2% pay raise for teachers and support staff, but the increase does require a local match, and most importantly, it doesn't start until December. More money from the state is welcome, but on the downside, it also requires this local match. Assuming the school board and the Board of Supervisors can find the local match beginning in December, it raises the issue of what to do with salaries for the first 5 months of the year. Teachers are on a salary scale expect to advance to the next step on July 1st. But because the $800,000 no loss item was removed from the governor's budget it was removed from the governor's budget by the General Assembly, the school board does not have the funds needed to pay for the step increase on July 1st. My first thought, and it's still, I think, the best solution, was to resolve this issue, which is spread the 2% state money over the whole year, which would make it a 1% pay raise. However, the state says this is not permitted. Therefore, the school board seems to have only 2 practical solutions available for dealing with salaries for the first 5 months of next year. 1, freeze all employees on their current step until December. Option 2, ask the Board of Supervisors for an additional $191,000 to cover the step increase for the 5 months period from July 1st to December 1st. A pay freeze would send a negative message to our employees and citizens, but more concerning to me, and it really is concerning to me, is the message it would send to our local and state leaders outside the county. These leaders have been saying good things about Orange County over the last several years. A salary freeze would damage their perception of Orange County, and a reputation damaged is hard to regain. I know the county is working hard on economic development, and our school system plays a large part when upscale companies make decisions on possibly moving to Orange County. In short, this is another reason we need to avoid this 5-month pay freeze. Therefore, I'm seeking your support for additional funds to bridge the 5-month funding gap from July 1st to December 1st. Most salary decisions have long-term consequences because they impact future budgets. But this request is a one-time cost and should not have any long-term budget consequences. During your work session, I would be happy to answer any questions you might have, and I want to thank you for your support for the school system and for your consideration of my request.
Thank you, Jim. Our next speaker.
Next speaker is Judy Carter, 11536 Rapidan Road, and also a member of the school board.
Good evening. Unlike Jim, I am speaking as an individual school board member, and to explain to you why neither one of us brought what we were going to say up for a vote for the school board. So we're not speaking for the school board, but we're speaking as individual school board members. I'm also speaking of a mother of 4 teachers, 1 teaching in our public school system here, and a grandmother of 9 and 3 that are in the public school system here. 2015 graduating class, I was able to speak to them for a very short period of time, but my speech to them was on responsibility. And it's not the responsibility that you think about of doing what we tell our children to do, what you say you're going to do, show up on time, but their responsibility to the community that they live in. Being involved with the Board of Supervisors, school board, fire and rescue, churches, you know, anything, there is so much to do even in a small community that we have, but my speech to them was about being responsible and being involved in their community. The Board of Supervisors and the school board have a responsibility to our students. We need to provide to them the best education that we can, and we need to set examples for these students. I have spoken with our delegate and our senator, but it seems to have fallen on deaf ears. We both have a very hard job. We not only educate children from K to 12, early childhood education, Head Start, excuse me for reading, but I can't remember all these probably off my head, severe and profound disabilities, alternative education, career and tech, governor's school, dual enrollment with Germanna Community College, ages birth to 22. And what I've learned today, which I did not know it was that many, that we do teach ELL, which is teaching English learning, what is it, Language learning, thank you. We have 163 students in those classes, and we have 20 different languages. I won't even read them to you because I can't pronounce half of them. But it's just remarkable that in this small community that we would have 20 different languages that are spoken at our high school. With the loss of the no-loss funds, that has really hurt us. The 2% from the state is for instruction and instructional support. What about the other employees? The state may leave them out, but the Orange County school system will not. They are as much a part of the success of instruction as the instructional people. What about our coaches and our leaders of extracurricular activities, like the robotics team, which many of you have been involved in? These people get paid an extremely low stipend for the hours they put in, but it's all for our students. Our staff has worked hard to balance our budget. We are even taking money away from teaching supplies. As a mother of 4 teachers, when we sit around the dining room table sometimes, they tell me what they do, and it's amazing to me, and I'm extremely proud of all of them, because I can tell you I couldn't do the job. But many, many teachers pay things out of their pocket. It's a small amount of money, but I think it's the message that we're sending in order to try to balance a budget. Even with all of our problems, our employees have made our system fully credible without warning, as Jim has said. That is huge, and it shows the dedication of our employees. They do deserve better, and so do our students. Please visit our schools and get to know our students. You know, someone paid for our public school education, and so now it's our turn to do that. We need to be examples on how to be responsible. The old saying is that actions speak louder than words. So please support our request that Dr. Tanner is going to present, and I'll also support what Jim has said. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy. Any further?
No, sir.
All right, we will close the public hearing. Thank you very much for giving us your comments, both on the budget and the tax rates. We appreciate the fact that the citizens do get involved in our governing actions. Okay. The public hearing is closed. Let's now start the work session.
Mr. Chairman, if I could, as I communicated to you earlier, there is Dr. Tanner and I and Mr. Bryan and Ms. Bradley have been working at our respective levels over the last several weeks of, I guess, how we might approach the school's budget for next year, understanding the no-loss money doesn't appear to be coming back. I did provide you all a letter from BACO that was addressed to the governor asking that it be brought back. I haven't heard much more or anything, frankly, coming out of Richmond that money will be reinstated in the veto session. So at this point now, I'm pretty well comfortable that money is not there. So correspondingly, we've been working through how best to approach this. One of the things that I brought to you all's attention, and there seemed to be there was agreement on the board of the $311,200 in recurring revenues, new revenues for the schools, and 311 in one-time expenditures to allow some flexibility in that 311 to provide some offset to some or to meet some of the priority needs. What I think Dr. Tanner is about to present to you tonight is the school board and her working through, and Mr. Bryan working through on how to, work through this year's budget, which was a gap in this year's funding because of the drop in the school age population or the ADM, average daily membership, and then setting it up for next year. There's a presentation that Dr. Tanner has prepared. I've distributed hard copies to you, and at this point, if it's okay with the chairman and the members of the board, I'll invite Dr. Tanner forward at this time to present that to you. And then once that's done, there's certainly conversations that you all would like to have or questions.
Where I go, so goes Alex.
That's a good plan.
Is that a good plan? I thought so. Thank you very much. We're pleased to be here and provide you with the latest information as I tell the board each time I speak. This is what I know as of April the 5th, 2016 at approximately 7:20 in the evening, because we know the governor has that opportunity to go through some vetoes. As you're reading the news, you're seeing different vetoes that are coming up and comments that he's making. So we're looking forward to the April 20th date, which is veto day. So hopefully things will be finalized at that point and we'll understand better. So it's still a work in progress, but we'd like to let you know the latest update. This was provided to our board last week, and we'll go through it, and then please feel free to stop us and ask us questions as we go along. Just to give you a frame of reference, a couple things that have gone on since we last spoke about our budget. We are looking at the end of each fiscal year, there's something called a caboose bill that comes out from the state, and that is a realignment of your current ADM and your funding for the state for this fiscal year. So instead of going year to year, when we started doing our budget, we went last year to this year. Now we're building off that caboose bill, which shows our actual funding for this fiscal year. As you know, we've had to make some adjustments in our overhead and some other expenditures this year to balance because of the decrease in our student enrollment. And as I talk to people across the state, I've talked to several recently who are talking about surprises they've gotten in their own enrollments this year, anywhere from 50 to 100 students in various divisions. So we're not alone in the challenge we're facing this year. But the initial budget that we brought to you had that increase that you'll see on this slide at the top for our top priority needs, and an additional request of $1.2 million. And under that, we had listed quite a few priority needs that we believed were important for us. It is a needs-based budget. We're required by law to present that to you, and we'll go through those again as a reminder. But as we looked at that, we've looked at funding sources for that, and we knew that we had to balance. So as we go through this, with the cost summary, you can see that we're looking for some additional state money, and we put this aside, excluding categorical. There's categorical dollars there that are related that we can't use. It's use it or lose it kind of money. Summer school, so if we have a certain number of summer school students, that money goes directly to summer school. You do not provide any local dollars for that summer program. So we can't use those dollars for anything else. If we participate in the Virginia Preschool Initiative, that is a program in which we participate. You do provide some funding for that, but if we don't use all those dollars, that's categorical. ESL, not a lot of money, but has to go directly to that program. So those are the things we pulled out that we couldn't use for salaries or some other operating costs that we had examined. So we excluded those, and then we saw that we had the increase of the $511,000 in the local funding, and we appreciate that coming from this board. But in order to make a balanced budget, we had to do some cost reductions. So we looked at our teaching positions we've gone through so far, classroom by classroom, grade level by grade level, and school by school. And we believe that we can reduce one elementary teaching position, and that will be through attrition rather than a reduction in force. We also are looking at some of our contracted maintenance and believe that we will, as much as I hate to say this, tighten our belts around that and reduce $7,500 in that contracted maintenance. We looked, as Mrs. Carter mentioned, and went across the board at about, said if we're having a reduction in students of about 1%, we'll take 1% across the board in instructional supplies. And then we reduced our priority needs. We went back in, examined all of those, and had to make some very, very tough decisions, and resulting in a reduction of $122,347 from the initial priority needs. So we took away some of those. So that's how we're able to balance. All right, I'll let Alex walk you through the priority needs cost because, as Mr. Hopkins mentioned, the state, Alex has talked to someone directly at the State Department to get clarity on the 2%. We want to make sure we're doing exactly as the state intends with that, so he'll go through that.
So when we first presented the budget, we presented $889,000, and that included 2.5% increase for all employees for the full year. We've since gone back and looked at what it would cost for an increase for all employees, first on a whole year basis, and then following the guidelines from the state from December 1st through June 30th. In talking with Mr. Kent Dickey at the Department of Education, he clarified that the incentive dollars that the state is offering, $199,000, is only an incentive that we can capture if we implement a 2% increase for all instructional and instructional aides no later than December 1st through June 30th. It's a percentage increase, it's not a dollar amount. So we can't implement 1% or just over 1% for the full year and say we've spent this much in increases, where's our incentive money? It must be 2% on average for instructional staff. So when going through the analysis, position by position, we recalculated the number, and that's the $412,000. The Virginia retirement system.
Does that include the non-instructional?
Yes.
Yes, that's for all employees.
That's all employees. Our board had tasked us with the responsibility of bringing forward the salary improvements for all employees, not just instructional staff. But the incentive money only applies to instructional and instructional support positions.
How much would the state be supplying for that same period for the instructional
We'll
support?
show you that.
Huh?
We'll show you that.
All right, okay.
The Virginia retirement system cost, that's an increase. It's mandated by the state. We originally proposed it was $191,000. In reviewing the differences between the professional and non-professional rates and going again case-by-case basis, we were able to bring that down to $101,000. The 7.3% increase in health insurance, that's the same. It's going to cost $303,000 for the school system. Special education teacher, we left that in. Blue Ridge Virtual Governor School, the $13,865. We did remove the $30,000 for the Germanic
Right,
Community
we
College.
had, in that initial request to you, we had, in our priorities, we had additional $30,000 in there, and it was to go toward two projects. We were going to fund some of our students to go to the, hopefully to the Charlottesville Albemarle Technical Center, that can provide a variety of technical courses that we can't currently offer. We're going to give scholarships for some of them to go there. And then also, we are applying for a grant with Germana, and it's related to advanced studies for students and associated with a Pell Grant. And they said that if we could provide additional funding, if we get the grant, then we could add additional students who wouldn't qualify for the Pell, because that is based on income. So we did reduce this back. This is absolutely a top priority for us, because each year in Orange, we have, instead of having 18 slots that are designated for Orange, it's been, the county's been doing this for years, for the regional virtual governor school. We actually, our students are here, but they participate with several other counties in a virtual manner. Orange many years ago said we have a lot more students that could qualify for that program than the 18. We need 36 at each grade level. This will be the 9th graders coming in. We already have those numbers in 10th, 11th, and 12th. So this would be the last grade level that needed to up those numbers, and then we'd be set. So this is the amount that we would take, that we'd have to pay above and beyond what the state provides for those students.
Okay, we left the $31,000 for the 3 Chromebook labs. It's important to keep moving forward with technology as other additional bus replacement that was talked about with the additional mileage that we're driving, we are not meeting the 15-year cycle that the state would like us to be on. Our buses have a lot more miles on them than average. What we did end up having to cut back was the additional transportation, which was for 2 replacement vehicles, increased fuel costs and repairs. We removed $67,000 from the original proposal of $125,000. We'll have to work with the Director of Transportation to figure out where exactly these cuts will come from. And then unfortunately, we removed the equipment replacement and the classroom furniture replacement. What we were trying to do there was establish a replacement cycle so that we didn't kick the can down the road and have to buy a whole bunch of equipment at a later date for a large sum of money. We're trying to replace as we could. Unfortunately, this may not be the year for it, so we removed those from the needs.
Excuse me, minor point, but explain to me what, you say 3 Chromebook labs, what does that mean?
A lot of the classroom work that's done now are on the smaller Chromebooks, and they actually buy them as labs, so they're in carts that they move, but they're the smaller tablets. But the Chromebook is the brand that's used most often now. And so they're actually moved into the classroom and used for a class set. So this would be 3 classroom sets of the tablets. Chromebooks are tablets.
Well,
They're not iPads, they're smaller devices that are used for instructional purposes.
Roughly how many in a class then that you have for?
The sets have, Daryl, I think, said that each set would have approximately 30 in each one.
So we're
Plus the
talking
cards.
90 Chromebooks.
The cart, for
Plus
the
card
charging.
which charges
For the
them all
charging.
and secures them all when they're not being used.
So I guess what's confused me, the labs part, is that just,
That's just the terminology they use. They're actually portable labs, so that you could use them for each classroom. They're on carts, they charge in the cart, and we
Okay.
already have laptop carts
okay.
that have.
So a Chromebook lab is a conveyance that 30 Chromebooks roost in. Is that what that means?
Be 3 sets of those. They just are movable labs is really what they
Okay.
are. Instead of having to have them set up in a separate room, you move them from space to space.
Okay.
We're currently using some Chromebooks in just select areas, and we're looking forward to it. Being able to use them even more. They're not as expensive as some of the larger devices. They're smaller, tighter devices, but are really used more and more now for instructional purposes.
Now, the 13,865, that is for the Blue Ridge, that's for the
The additional
freshmen,
slots.
and that's going from 18 to 36?
Yes.
And and that's our share of that increase?
Yes, we get a certain number and through the state funding. And what's happened in the region, I'll have to say, in the region, I did not work with it. Well, I did, actually, in Madison, was in a meeting when many years ago, Orange was at the table and said, I remember, can we have more slots? And at that time, we're in with Nelson and Louisa
And you were opposed to it then, huh?
and Madison, yeah. And so I thought, well, I'm really impressed by that question coming up. And what was happening at that time, everyone didn't use all their slots. So somebody like Nelson or Madison or the smaller divisions would say, I don't need but, 15 out of my 18 or 12 out of my 18 this particular year. And so they went back out. What we're finding is other divisions now are, Goochland for one, and some others are very interested in having more students in this, in the governor's school. And so the slots are not as easy to come by, and therefore there's a system now that you have to pay for those additional slots.
When somebody goes into the governor's school as a freshman, do they stay then in the governor's school throughout the 4 years?
They do, and we should send you information if you've not had the opportunity. Mr. Hopkins serves on the board for the governor's school, and I think he would agree with me if you have the chance to come see the senior productions. The entire region for this governor's school comes to our building, and we provide the space, and the seniors present their projects, and I think some equal college projects that I've seen before on display at universities. So we'll get you the date to come see those.
Oh, it's wonderful. You get to talk to the students. I'm going to Cornell, I'm going to Harvard, I'm going to this, and they're just so enthusiastic. I mean, if you're interested in education, you spend an hour there, you just come out beaming.
And they're very in-depth projects they do, but the interesting thing about the virtual piece of this is we will have some students sitting in our school working on a collaborative project with somebody from Nelson or Louisa or Fluvanna or Goochland, which is another great opportunity to prepare them for college.
The health insurance premiums, at one point, we thought there was going to be a smaller increase there. Do we have any update on that at this point? Do we,
Yes.
I don't know if it's
We
a
thought
significant
ours
dollar,
was
but.
larger at first.
The latest, I think this was a couple of weeks ago, that, we got an email from, Digital Benefits saying it was gonna be like 5.2, according to the actual renewal that came in from Anthem. So that is the latest I've heard,
But-
but I don't,
Well,
you
we'll-
know, they
but
still
did that-
haven't sent me the charts and everything on that.
As soon as no, I didn't have that information.
But
But
is that 5.2, does that apply to the schools as well?
it
Your
would,
understanding?
it
Okay.
would,
Okay.
it would, which would be fantastic, because we initially started at 9.2,
Right, 9.2.
I think, 9.2, so we dropped from 9.2 in our initial planning to 7.3, so if we could drop again, that would be,
I mean, it's not a huge amount of money, but it's
no,
money.
no, any amount helps. All right, so, okay.
The question about the first item, the 412, I just want to make sure I understand. Is that 2% also beginning December 1, or is that 2% for everyone for the entire year? I just want to make sure I understand what that,
2% for everyone as of December 1.
December 1st.
so, okay.
And that includes the related FICA and VRS component as well.
That's the all-in number
That's
That's
the all-in
everything.
number for December 1st through June 30.
for all personnel.
For all personnel.
All personnel, all full-time personnel.
And presumably 199 of that is the state
That's what we're going to next.
portion? Okay.
So, Alex, you wanna do this one?
Okay, so the first thing we looked at here was option 1 would just be a 1% average for all employees, all full-time employees, for the full year. What would that cost? And that's $353,000. There'd be no state incentive when you do go that route. So then it needs to be, the funds need to come from someplace else, so the local match. We left that at the 123 because that's the local match required under the 2% incentive plan, just to give some benchmark for numbers. Other state funds, we can use 60,320 of that 475,000 that's available. We'd need an additional 141,000 from the county, so it'd be about $164,000 we'd need, 264,000 we'd need from the county. And then we could use 29,000 in cost reductions. And that's how we would fund this 1% on average for the full year. The other option is the 2% effective December 1 through June 30th. That's the 412 spoke of in the prior slide. We would then get the 199,000 in state incentive. There'd be the local match required of the 123. We would still use 60,320 in state funds. Local funds, we would not require any additional local funds going this route, and we would still use the 29,000 in cost reductions.
What is that? What is the 29,000?
That's part of where we take out, remove the teacher,
Right.
one instructional position.
We're using some of those reductions that we made to go for health
Okay.
insurance and other areas, but we could, determine that after doing that, we could devote this much to the salary. So as we look at this led us to, the information that I presented to the board is a recommendation for their consideration for balancing the budget. If we look on, at the beginning, you can see that, initially, we could look at, if we took the dollars that you set aside for us, the $511,200 initially for operating costs, reoccurring costs, the $311 initially were set aside as a one-time capital project cost. So if we look at that, we have if you see on the left, the operating, the salary increase, the VRS retirement, the health insurance, the Blue Ridge Virtual Governor School, because those are the continuing costs we have. And then initially, if we put all of those others, the Chromebooks, the bus replacement, that additional transportation, the equipment replacement, and the classroom furniture on the other side, that's what we talked about originally with you. And so that you see the 311 would have to go to those designated areas. But as we began to cut the priority needs, we found that where we needed to cut were really in some of those one-time areas. So as we just reviewed, we took reductions in, we wiped out actually, the equipment replacement, the classroom furniture replacement, some additional transportation requirements. We took those out of priorities, and we still are unable to balance the budget without asking for this level of support. So on the right side, you would see, if we were to give the 2% effective December 1, we still will face some of the challenges that Mr. Hopkins outlined to you. It would basically be a freeze. We would have to have a dual contract system set up. We believe we can do it under one contract, but it have to be clear to employees that you're paid at one rate from July 1 to the end of November, and at another rate starting December 1. Because their state does require that 2% begin at least by December 1. It can begin before that, but it can't begin after that. So we still aren't able to balance without doing this. And in order to give that 2%, you'll see that we need to use some of those initially earmarked funds for capital of the 311 to shift those over to our operating cost in order to make the budget balanced.
You're only talking about roughly 122,000
Yes,
shifted.
yes.
Why is the 7.3 increase, why does that go from 55 to 177?
That's how we're funding the health insurance increase. This is why the county budget, what was presented, the original budget before, it didn't balance. We weren't able to fund everything that we needed to.
Right. When we looked at and had to say, okay, if we had to stick by the balance, that requirement, without going in deep, as I told the board, without going in and doing some, what I consider drastic and deep cuts to the system, we had $200,000, and this is where I could spend it. So we could use those, I could tell the board I could put that much towards salary increase to get that, so we could get the state initiative, but then we really only had that amount you see there left over to spread out in different places. So we started spreading it out in different places, saying we still can't make all of this work and balance the budget, especially when you look at the health insurance. We did pick up dollars from the state for retirement, much more than we realized once we used our caboose bill and moved forward. So that cut down on the requirement for the local contribution to the Virginia retirement system, but it's still the healthcare costs, and we can't balance a budget with using the $200,000 and get the incentive. So those were the choices we made. So given the fact that the incentive money is there, I made a recommendation to the board that we do move forward to capture the incentive money, because as we can determine right now, again, governor hasn't vetoed, don't know what's going to happen, but there are some funds that will flow through to the county again next year as part of this incentive, because it starts the December 1st, but it actually, some of the support money will go through to FY18. So we felt like if we would not only lose the dollars for FY17, but could potentially lose more state matches in FY18, because the intention is for that to flow through for that year and a half.
So the state match would go into their basic salary for years beyond this coming year.
It would be, at least in this year, the FY17, FY18.
And Dr. Tanner and Alex, that there is additional basic aid in the amount of $600 and some thousand that's earmarked for the second year of the biennium, right?
There's additional money, and I won't stick to that number right now because some of the changes that we had to analyze is what's happening is, for instance, when you go in, you will see shifting. They're shifting things out of basic aid to lottery, out of lottery to basic aid. So we found a couple of places that looked like we would get a certain amount, but then we saw some shifts in some of the categorical funding. And so we do know that there are additional dollars. I can get you the amount that we see in the
But-
projection.
And they've got to go through actually another amendment of that budget next General Assembly cycle.
Yes.
And then they have a caboose for this next year's budget
Yes.
and moving parts. I suggest that because I know Dr. Tanner and I have talked about it, and I think I know I've mentioned to the board. What you have before you is a proposal of using what were recommended as one-time funds, the 311, so that there wasn't an anticipation of them going through. I think this certainly uses a very prudent approach to getting to a balanced budget, if the board agrees. But one of the things is that 122, and seeing how that might be offset with new state revenues coming down is kind of a way of getting it back into a structurally balanced way. I only say that once just to kind of put a placeholder that we have to start out with $122,000 in next year's budget to make up for those dollars that are used this year, or 2 years from now. I'm getting mixed up, but anyhow, everybody I think knows what I'm talking
Well,
about.
Okay.
it's sometimes you're working FY16 talking about 17 and 18, so it doesn't
Okay,
get confusing.
I fell off the turnip truck somewhere back up the street here, so
That's
let me
all right.
just ask you. When you get down to we're on the last piece of paper here, we
Yes.
start over if we turn the page. So how much are you off at this point?
We're balanced if we do this.
If you do what?
If we follow the recommendation.
If we can take that money from that was set aside out of the 311 to move over to operating, we balance. After cutting the position, reducing instructional supplies, making a reduction in maintenance, and eliminating those priority needs that we had. We will balance
Okay,
with
but
the
you're
511.
showing here, and, you know, hopefully this is gonna come down, but you're showing 303,000 as the increase in the health premiums, yet over here, you're only up to 177,000.
That's the local share. That's the local funds required. The balance of that would be funded through state funds that we have.
Okay.
That are currently earmarked elsewhere.
Well, they're not earmarked elsewhere, but we did receive additional state money based on the different programs and
We
funding.
received some additional, sorry, we've talked about this for so long, so I apologize if it's, not clear. On the first slide, you saw that we have additional $495,475 that we can apply to operating costs. We chose
Okay, so
to
that's,
use,
Using some of
that's where you
capture
took that money. and
those
put it-
dollars, they're state dollars, we, chose to capture that.
Was
And I-
that 495 was not in your original budget, correct?
We had some, but it was,
Okay.
it was actually a lot more than that.
Well, there was the 800, so the 800 has been replaced, was pulled out, and
It's
you
a
get
lot more than that in the last, yes, sir.
and you get the 495
What they
instead
did-
of the 800.
Well, what they did is, if you've read, it was over $3 million that were set aside to give to the localities.
Mm-hmm.
And then they decided, in the committee that they would take that pot of money and instead of giving it to, 14
The no loss, yeah.
counties for no loss, they would then run a formula. So every school division received a per pupil amount, about $5 per pupil, but it's run against your composite index. So we received some more money. It wasn't the 800, which would have been a lot more beneficial to us. And that's why I told us, folks on my staff, is you can go around and talk to some other school divisions, and they are very pleased to receive that. But they're either increased enrollment, declining composite index, those types in place, because they also did some re-benchmarking. So when we get our dollars, also the $62,000 you see there, for later on for the, special education teacher, that's all coming from state dollars. Because we had additional money in, special education, so we're applying it for that teacher. So that's not any local cost. So what we've had to do is take all the state funds we can, capture anything that's not categorical, and use that as part of our salaries and benefits, because that's our top priority. And I'll have to say, unfortunately, for me, as a leader in the school system, this list should have some really amazing and invigorating programs for our students, because that's my job to help move us forward. And we know it's a struggling year for us to balance the budget. And so when you get down to it, it's basically our people, keeping the good people we have, because we're not gonna make a difference with these children unless we have the highest quality people that we can get here, not only highest quality dedicated people. So the focus here is on the salaries, the retirement system, and the health insurance, and very few other things, considering we have a system with 9 schools and 10 facilities. So,
By my back of the envelope figuring, if the 7.3 gets, for the health insurance does come in at 5.2, it's about $80,000. How would you look at moving, would some things go back in at that point, some of these things that have been cut?
I imagine it's not going to be enough to accomplish what I would really like to achieve, is not to freeze salaries. But if it's only at that amount, it won't help me accomplish that goal, because I agree with Mr. Hopkins, the salary freeze is not a place we want to be. But we'd have to look at the figures and then do some prioritizing. I can't say which areas, but I would like to see something at least go back in for our students to give them more opportunities. As much as I hate to say that some of those other things can wait. But we'll have to have that discussion. I don't make these decisions by myself.
Is there any rationale for coming from the state as to why they pick a December start date, other than to save money? I mean, I get that part, but is there any, what are they trying to accomplish? Anything other than just playing a trick?
No, you've seen that. I've seen it before during my time in education, but it's more for, governmental agencies. You'll sometimes see that at, the government level, community colleges, or somebody will be doing it. I've seen that, but I haven't experienced it in K-12. The initial discussion was, if you remember in the governor's budget, was to have that the second year. So it'd be the 2% in FY18. I don't know a lot of the conversations that occurred to move it back. There was a sense that, at least in the initial discussions of the FY18, I know a lot of school divisions were asking if we do something in FY17, could we at least get the credit toward moving in that direction? But I honestly don't know, except just to get it in the budget and to spread those costs over a 2-year period over the biennial, but leaving it at a 2% rather than a 1%.
Yeah, I think Dr. Tanner hits on, they have 24 months to which to spend dollars, and so 2% looks more than 1%. And so in order to save, to make it over 19 months, they can do 19 months, and then that's,
Right, I think that's
that
dollars.
5 months worth of money got spread somewhere else. I mean, there's, that to me is how that stuff
And
sometimes works.
as much as we would say that it's a challenge for us to do, for the employees, 2% long-term is,
Well, because it rolls into retirement and everything else, yeah,
right,
sure.
than the 1%. But I think it's all a dollar, the shifting of dollars and what's left and how do you spread it out over that period of time.
But I guess the question, without this December 1 start date, the state's plan was no salary increase for
Next year.
instruction,
Yeah.
for
next
17.
year, was a 2, and a 2% the following.
That was the Senate and the governor's, I forget the House.
The House, it's,
There were 3 versions.
there were 3 versions.
Mr. White, I was just gonna say that I did read in the language that came out from the compensation board, they also were timing those raises for December 1st. And they said it was contingent upon, the close of this
I'm understanding, what you're telling us is if you shift that around with the 122 changed, that accomplishes what you wanna do with a 2% increase when you want to do it. Not December 1st, correct?
Say that again, sorry. When do I wanna do it?
When she has to do it.
I don't think it's when she went, I think it is December 1.
Is that a December 1 start date, or is it?
That is a
Yes.
December one
Okay,
start date.
not-
I just
and
wanna be
not-
sure I heard the
And
question.
not an earlier start date?
To do the earlier
What
start
you-
date at the 1% was 191.
Okay.
But we get, you know,
There's no match.
no match at all, they don't even, we'll lose the 200.
I thought I wrote down a number of 191, and I thought that was to do the 2% starting July 1.
That's 1%.
No, Mr. Hopkins did mention it would be, to give a step, so if you're as he said, in education, people are on scale steps, so you go from, I've been here 12 years, I go to 13 years. To give that increase and just say you're not frozen, like if you're here, this is your 12th year, next year's your 13th, you go ahead and move on our scale, just to do that from July 1 until the end of November. So just so you move. It's not 2%, but you just get to go on and
Whatever
move.
the step is for individuals.
Right.
Not
that would be
everybody would have a step during that
That would
period,
be
then there'd be
approximately
different.
191,000.
Now, what about after December 1st? Would the steps then in addition to the 2%?
No, we'd have to work with our steps so that you would get this additional amount that you see here, we'd have to spread so that we could make sure that on December 1st, everyone had an average of 2%.
An
They would have
average
already
for everybody.
moved.
So you could restore some steps.
It's rather complicated in what we'd have to figure out, but they would just basically mean that you move your step, so say your step is a 1.3, you get that, but as of December 1, we would have to change all the scales and everything to show that on that date, you move to a 2%.
Your total of two.
Some,
The
Average.
sum of it.
Yeah, the total.
the people who got the step in July would just be getting their part of their 2% early.
Exactly.
Yes.
Now, question for you. Your employees, if they were given an option of a 2% raise or their step increase, one or the other, what would they choose?
What would they choose? I really can't speak, I haven't asked them. I think you would have, I can venture, a guess, I think you'd be split, because I think some people do perceive if I don't move, you know, that's a very negative connotation. You're not gonna hear that, I don't think, from many school divisions about freezing. That's something you heard years ago. Frozen salaries, no one moved, no one did anything. So some people are going to say, well, I want my step, but I also want the 2 in December, because that's a big item being discussed at the state level. So I don't know that people would say either give me a step or give me this. I think that the discussion of the 2% that's going to be effective December 1, as Mr. Hopkins and others have talked in our board meetings, that's a communication issue with us, because when you hear 2%, you don't hear December 1.
How do you,
So,
how would you compare the freeze, the funds for the freeze versus that 188 that you still have on one-time capital expenditures?
how would I compare?
Yeah, which is more important?
So which is more important?
Well, it's just-
Having the 188 for the bus, the transportation, the Chromebooks, or being able to apply that to,
the 191 that you need to keep the steps moving.
well, I have at least one board member behind me that's probably kicking me right now.
He's already spoken.
I would say that, again, back to our highest priorities are our people. So that's a discussion we would have with the board, but it's also a discussion we need to have with you, because it's clear that, as Mr. David has stated, if there's an expectation that we use it and pay it back the next year, that's something we have to calculate, because That would be going into operating costs, which would be a reoccurring cost.
Well, that would
But we
make, that would make
we
it,
could adjust
that
it.
would adjust the,
Yes.
operating costs up a lot more than the
Yes.
the 122.
That's right. And what we could do is go back, because our board is still working. This is the latest that we have as of this date. The goal that we had tonight was to help you see what we're doing to try to balance, but know that we can't balance without deeper cuts, without using some of that 311 and putting in operating. But if we're going to get a reduction in health insurance, and we're gonna have to look again as soon as the state settles on their budget, we haven't run the figures, actually, on what Mr. Hopkins recommended. We just had our work session Monday night, a week ago, Monday night, and that was a topic that came up, and we haven't run the figures to do that comparison between that and then the two over the year to present to our budget, our board, so.
But it seems that there, in terms of, let me just focus on teacher salaries for a moment, because there seems to be three things at play. When the program was put in place, whatever it was, 4 years ago, I guess now, one of the features of that, I thought, was to change those steps to be annual, to years of experience.
Yes.
They were
Yes.
no longer steps.
Yes.
They were years of experience.
Yes.
So therefore, it seems to me in sort of the baseline budgeting process, you know, a teacher that is here another year should be budgeted for moving to that
Yes.
step. And so that's one aspect of salary. The second piece, of course, is the state, whatever in the world they're doing with this
Right.
December stuff.
But-
And then another piece was your original proposal of 2%. So now we have sort of three moving pieces with respect to
Actually, it was
just
over 2%. Our initial proposal was over 2%.
2.5, I'm sorry, yeah, 2.5. That's right, it was, there's the step, or the years of experience
Right.
increase. The proposal of 2.5, which I presumably would have, on average, taken all of the individual steps up by 2.5%. On average. And now also, we've got the state 2% starting December 1. I guess I don't understand how those are playing together. Did we not budget for the years of experience in the baseline budget? Did we assume a freeze? Or was that sort of subsumed in the 2.5
That's
proposal?
subsumed in it's in the 2.5.
So part of the 2.5
Is the step. It was all encompassing.
was because of experience.
It wasn't step plus 2.5. Some people will establish a scale on steps and then say you're gonna get a COLA. You get your step and a 2, of this and of that. We just said this is how much it's gonna cost for us to give approximately 2.5, and we were gonna do it. One of the goals behind the work that was done here years ago is to get back to, just as you said, a year experience moves you on that scale, because what happened during the very, very difficult times, not only in Orange but in other divisions, everyone was frozen. So you freeze, and that means I'm a first year teacher this year, so I'm at 0, no experience. I get a year's experience, I go to level 1, but it's frozen. So it's the same as 0.
Well, that's why,
So now I have the person coming in behind me is making exactly the same thing I'm making with 1 year experience. And most school divisions had to freeze for a couple of years. So what happened, and same thing happened in Orange, new teacher comes in, 0 experience, they make this. First year teacher comes back, 1 year
Making the
experience,
same
they
way.
make the same thing, and then somebody's been here for 2 years makes the same thing.
Same
So
thing
what
with public
happens, it
safety,
skewed the
congressional.
scale so much that you could still look at a scale and say, oh, that's what you make as a 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But in reality, you had skewed the scales because you kept holding at that end and you never moved. So I will say credits to you and to the school board for getting that fixed, because there's some school divisions that are just coming out of that now.
but we didn't fix it if we're not using it. I mean,
Right,
and
right. If
so-
we don't use it, we're back to that.
And that's the reason for raising it here, is
Yes.
it just now, you know, became somewhat clearer what
Yes.
the impact, was.
Yes.
We're in essence, we haven't budgeted for those, I hate to keep using them steps, because they're no longer steps, but the.
We call them steps, that's fine.
Okay,
A steps equates
for-
to.
for
The
the-
step piece of the
But you-
compensation
We
program.
But you
did.
did originally have it budgeted.
In that, yes.
But now, in order, because of that big cut from the state on the no loss, that led you to this 5-month freeze on everybody.
In our initial request, we had a 2.5. What the board had done is they had developed the salary plan. They initially did as a 5-year plan. It had multiple components in it. One was to reduce the stretch of the scales, and then also to increase the percentage so as to be competitive in the market in this area. So what we did is we stretched that plan this year. Well, last year I stretched it to 5 to 6, and this year we stretched it from 5 to actually 8 years. To make that happen. But what we had to do in order to do that was to get to where the board had planned to be in 5 years. To get to that point in 8 years, it would take an average of a 2.5% increase.
That's a fourth piece. That's
Sorry, I didn't mean
adjusting.
to add another piece.
But it is, I mean, what I'm concerned about right now is, as of today,
So right now, if we
there's a piece of paper that says years' experience salary.
Yes, right.
And come July 1, or whatever the anniversary dates are, you know, presumably every teacher is going to have 1 more year's experience.
That's exactly right.
And should move to that new number.
That's right.
And it
Some
sounds like we're not in a position to move them to that
We're
new
not.
number.
Not
So what
until-
does that cost? Just that, not the adjusting the scale. Is that the 191?
Yes.
All right, I'm slow, but I'm good.
That's your
Okay.
number.
But now, after December 1st, they will move up their step.
No, the number in the step goes up.
Or what?
Right, so there are 2 things going on. One is we can move them on their step. The steps on average are about a 1.3%.
Okay.
All right, so if you move a step, it's approximately 1 to 1.3% on average. So you move your step, and then no one in that group is gonna, I don't believe, somebody will probably tell me later I was wrong, there's probably one lone person out there, but, so it's not likely that anybody would get that 2%. So they would stay at the step, then we would come in and have to make a decision, which I believe would be, we would adjust the scale again. And so they, another option is you leave your own step, figure out this somewhat strange calculation to average everybody out to 2. But I think we'd go in and adjust the scales mid-year.
But I guess
So
why
that
is
will
our,
sustain it.
why is our top compensation priority not having that, allowing people to, as we committed on, I don't think it's too strong a word, when we adopted this compensation plan, why would we not have allow people to move to their next step?
Or
Forget all
providing-
the other stuff for a minute. Why would we not move them to their next step?
To provide the basic amount of money on a recurring annual basis equal to the movement of all.
But I'm saying the top priority, we've got money in there.
Right.
Why would that not be the first dollar spent? I guess is my question. It's, cause it sounds to me like
Because
that
we
should
have
be,
to-
That was my question
Because-
as to which would be preferred.
Right. Well, the first dollar, as we were building it,
Let me answer your question, because I've been dying to answer it. In other words, the question you asked about, ask the teacher which they would like to do.
Which they would prefer to do, yes.
Which they prefer. The problem is, we as managers would have to say, can't do that, because we need to go after this money from Richmond. If we turn this money down from Richmond that's coming in December, it's turned down forever. I mean, this money coming from Richmond, we start getting in December, it'll be there next year, it'll be there next year, it'll be there the next year.
Okay.
But if we turn it down now.
Well, they tell you that, but
Well, let's put it this way, it's always been there, because when the state says they're providing money to raise your teacher's scale,
They try to
they
stay.
don't use exactly our scale. They have their own scale, because, they're not, if Fairfax County wants to pay their teachers $80,000 or $90,000, the state's not saying, I'm gonna pick up 2% of that. They it's a sort of a flat rate around the whole county. But, I mean, we just have to do whatever we have to do to get this money from the state, because to say no, we just can't turn down the
Look-
money from the state.
And,
Let me ask
just,
one
Mr. White,
question
I think,
with-
if I could just respond to your question, and maybe it's because we were tasked to do. The board has worked, to really look at salaries, so to your point of, wouldn't your first priority just to move to that step?
Or
I
at
would-
least do that, I guess. is
Well,
what I'm
I would say everybody agrees when we initially started planning the budget, that was at least, but that wasn't enough. We are so far behind in the market that this board said, there's no need in saying, let's just hold, cause to us, that's holding.
But I,
So that's why we didn't start with that initial, that's why we started, but yes, that's a basic,
I'm talking about building
understanding.
blocks, that's
Yes.
the first of the building blocks.
yes, but that's why you don't see it just set aside initially in the budget.
But I think, Mr. White, also what you're asking is, it is a priority, because if you have good teachers, we're gonna have success. But you also have, before you get to the teachers, you have the health insurance you have to pay, you have the VRS, you got a special education teacher, that those are not ifs, or
Yes,
those are
absolutely.
must.
Requirements
So when you do a
from
priority,
beyond us.
you have the priorities first, and then our first priority after what the state requires is teacher salaries. Because I think your question was, why wasn't that at the beginning? The teacher steps.
Very good point.
We'd love for it to be there, but it can't be because we have the other requirements that we have to meet. Is that answer your question? I think.
I guess it would, you know.
Beyond the mandates, that's the next.
Yeah.
Mandate, that's the word
All
I
right,
should be using.
the question I have then, what this does, it allows you to accomplish not what you want, but what works within the parameters that we set up for what we could give you. The 122, we don't have to find a replacement for it next year, but the year following that, that's when this has to be addressed, right? Okay.
We'll say the year after, but I can only speak for what we're seeing for 2 years, for FY 17 and 18. I
Right,
don't-
so beyond 18, at that point in time, the piper's gotta be paid. Hopefully.
That
either
increases our
fund-
base.
Yeah,
This year, this budget for this time next year, we'll have to address the 122.
Okay,
Okay.
but if we looked at the 191, or what I'm looking at is 188, if I'm looking at that, that's a one-time thing. That's not gonna add to my base if I provide the steps between July and December. If I provide the step increases, that,
It'll be recurring, yeah.
Yeah,
It's not a
of course
one-time
now.
thing.
But-
Salaries.
and you dig a deeper capital hole, because those buses still will be needed,
I understand,
and
I'm
they don't
just,
get any cheaper.
all I'm saying is, from the standpoint of giving them the option of that other 188, then they can decide, amongst the school board, whether that, but I'm not sure that if this goes in, you're gonna have those steps take place after December 1st anyway. And if you're taking them place, between, July and July and December, they're not gonna be repeated again. So that's just a one-shot affair.
It's I think what we need to
He's
do
saying
is
yes, and I'm saying
show,
no.
well, no, I think it's cumulative, because you get a certain amount, which is gonna lead, it's just that I'm paying you a little bit before I up it to the amount, but the actual amount is that 2% at the end of the year. It's
I still gotta
2%.
do the full 2%, and I've gotta, and I would have to do it on top of the frozen steps or the, provided steps. So that 2% is gonna go above both of them. All right.
Let me
Okay.
say where the problem comes, because it comes in where you consider the baseline. Is the baseline for the 2% what they got paid this year? Or is it what they're gonna be paid on November 30th? Now, we got gotta have an answer to
See,
that
and
question
that's what
before
we
we
have.
can make a
That's why-
decision.
Okay, and if it were on the, this year, then that step between now and December, or between July and September, would not represent a permanent increase,
That's
just a
correct.
one-shot affair. But
But
if they're measuring it on, November 30th, then it becomes a permanent increase.
And
I
that's
got you.
why, after, our discussion and, looking at the information we had, that's a clarification, because I'll be honest with you. It took a call to Richmond to get the exact clarification that Alex was able to get with somebody in the finance office in Richmond, to be clear on the December 1st, because there've been so many options out there discussed, and whether or not you can count something here and apply it later, that I was in a meeting with superintendents, and sitting around the table, people were saying, you can do this, and somebody else said, no, you can't. So I called Alex and said, get on the phone, and that's when he was on the phone and found out that it has to be effective December 1. Now we can go back, because if we do play out the scenario that Mr. Hopkins had mentioned, and in our next work with our board, we can ask, all right, and give them the scenario. So as long as by December 1 they're at 2,
Relative to this year,
Yes,
not to
yes,
November 30th,
right,
then that would be a one-shot affair.
right. So at the end of the
I'm
evening,
processing.
I think I understand that little piece of
But,
it.
I mean, my suspicion is the state is going to be looking at their last paycheck to decide what 2% is. I don't think the state's gonna go say, okay, we'll go back and look at what it was last June or May or whatever the last one is before July 1. So I don't think it's one time. I've spent 20 years on this board. Take my word for it, it's not one time.
All right,
and I'm sorry, we can't answer all the questions. Literally, it was last week in our work session that idea, I don't even know, Mr. Hopkins, if it was fully verbalized in that session. We've
If-
been having conversations
I
ever
guess
since
I
last
would be
week.
inclined if it were a one-shot affair, to let you use it let you decide how to use it, versus capital versus, step increases. I would be less restricted. If it's gonna be a permanent increase, I'm not sure that we're ready to buy into that. Can we word it that way?
Oh, it doesn't, again, the state's gonna, the state wants a 2% increase on December 1st. They're not talking about a 2% increase at some time in the past.
Well, other than,
They're not talking about 2% of something in the past. They're talking about 2% on what their last paycheck was.
either that, or this is what your budget was last year, this is your budget this year. I mean, I could argue that it's relative to each budget year.
Oh, sure, I could argue it too.
But
I thought it was 20 years on this board. 8 of those years were shadow government. But yeah, I really,
all right.
I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Brian, but I mean,
I'm confused, so I know you must be. That's why I called her back there. The main thing that we were doing is when we were working, we were taking things off like the supplies. Those were the things. If we can just be able to get enough money to balance our budget, which is basically $111,000 out of the $311, and that would help us balance our budget. And we'd be able to do the raise in December, which is what the state is saying. So I don't know if it's become, it sounds like to me it's become confusing, where the intent was, to be able to use
I don't have any
$311,000
problem with one point two.
over,
I was just looking whether or not, to give the school board the option of trying to solve that step freeze.
Which may, back to Mr. Johnson, and I'm processing, and
Always a good thing.
I don't know.
getting a little smoky in here though.
It is. But one of the things that's always been in my mind is, one time is one time, it's not there the next year. Also, on salaries, I always look in because you have employer taxes, you have retirement, and that gets baked into the budget, the base going forward. So, one of the things, and I know Dr. Tanner and I have talked, suggested to the board, I think it's really important, once we get through this current unpleasantness, that the two boards work, and Dr. Tanner and I are certainly committed, and Mr. Bryan and Glenda, to maybe coming up with a financing plan. I think Mr. White just hit on this kind of base annual amount that the salaries are going up to be able to create these longevity or the years of experience. But we do it in an environment that's not necessarily standing at the podium with slide decks and things, because that we're here trying to, as Ms. Carter, you said, we're confused and things, and that I just don't think, in fairness to all the people that we work for, taxpayers, civil employees and things, that maybe having that kind of more of an informal environment may serve us well. And so I don't, the board certainly can do the one time and how to bridge it. It sounds like we're there. I'm comfortable with what's presented before us today. But I think as a longer term, we may need to be a little bit more deliberate about this.
So if I can ask a question, excuse me, Mr. Chairman, that's okay. You know, we're talking about the 111, you're saying we've gotta pay that back. 122.
122.
You know, you're saying we've gotta pay that back, we're saying, you know, put it into the 200 and take it away from the capital, which would be recurring cost. The capital's not returning, but the other is. So if you take the 122 and put it with the 200, it would be what you're talking about, and what Mark has said, is that it would be recurring.
Oh, reducing.
Did I make that even more confusing? I tried to make it
Is
clear.
that the 580 on the capital that's recurring every year? Or am I bringing up something completely different?
Let's don't
That's
even go
completely
there.
different.
Please.
Stand in the corner.
But see, that, again, I'm proving.
Turn his
my-
mic off.
I'm proving my point.
Let's deal with one at a time.
This,
I mean, I think it's a simple thing of you, what you're trying to accomplish is a delayed increase, not frozen, it's delayed. And there's a difference in how that's perceived. And to do that, you need to shift a little bit, and yes, it brings a responsibility onto us in future budgets of 122. I don't see it going beyond that, because as we discovered, when you keep kicking the can for capital, it comes back and bites you. It bites you with seven-figure money.
I know.
Not 122, but, you know, 2,022,000. So I understand to try to get where y'all would like to be, but as a solution to allow you to take benefit of the money from the state, which they begrudgingly give, that would allow you to do something, and that commit us all to something that is so tremendous that next year and the year after, we're going to have a much more difficult conversation in how we work through this. One that I think we agreed we'll start on beforehand, but
Let me ask.
that's not an unbearable compromise to allow them to do something, because we tried to do.
Are you
the same
comfortable
thing.
with this particular,
Yes.
you?
Well, let me, go ahead, Jim, and then.
I have a question where this $75,000 to $80,000. Have you calculated the 75 to 80,000 in what we believe is going to be a savings into these figures?
No, we weren't, I didn't have that
Okay.
notification.
So-
That would need to go back into capital. I don't see putting it into operating again,
Well,
because
and that's, I don't.
that's another,
Right, but absolutely, but that's what I wanna make sure of, is,
But there's more than one kind of can.
exactly, and that's where.
And there's a salary can, and there's a capital can.
Right.
And, I mean, frankly, I don't think there's as much confusion here as there is squirming. Squirming sometimes maybe looks like they're confused, but that's not really what it is. I mean, there's obviously a desire on the part of the school board and the superintendent to not have this gap. And you can't can't finesse yourself around that gap. The gap's either there or it's not there. And if you, and I know this is giving Jim heartburn because, and I agree with him, if we're committed to something, then that really should be, the first horse saddled up.
And I think it's a matter of,
If you put it off until December 1, then you've changed the whole equation.
you have changed the
You
equation.
don't
but-
make everything all right on December 1 by
But I
doing
don't,
the
the
2%.
thing is, I don't think you have to put it off. I mean, I can't build a new spreadsheet here, but it just eyeballing the step increases, you know, they're relatively modest on a percentage basis, like you said, you know, 1 to 1.3, somewhere along in there, percent. You know, what is the money flow look like if you, you know, abided by this plan and allow people to get their step increase? Is it a July 1 start or is it anniversary start? How do you?
July 1.
It is July, okay, so on July 1, you know, those that are entitled to a step increase get it. What's the cost of that? Question number 1. I don't think we know.
No, you know what your cost is from that date until the end of November, and I would just say,
Well, that's where I'm going. If we
Right.
know that number, why not do that July 1? And then when it comes to December 1, the next change, you make sure that, then everybody gets trued up to the 2%. If they got a little bit because of their step July 1, if you're gonna do the 2%.
You have to average 2%.
Right.
That's where I think you
It's
do.
an
And the state money is for instructional
So they get,
and instructional
so
aids
the
only.
scale changes.
But the
instructional
state
support,
funds have to.
Right, yeah, I was using.
Well,
it can be.
But you
That's why
change
the
the scale.
412.
yeah.
You change the
So
scale.
I would
That's why.
suggest sorry. All right, so a couple of things are being discussed here tonight. We haven't discussed as the board. We haven't worked through the figures for the board. So I'm the person that, I'm a real stickler for this, and Alex is standing here because he knows I can step on his foot automatically, is that I don't usually put out numbers that I haven't worked through first. So the idea of the number from July 1 to end of November is a new number that even all of our board members haven't worked through.
But there is a
and looked
number.
at
We
that
can
plan.
determine
No,
what that number is.
Yes, we can. We just have not, because
Okay, that's fine.
that was raised in a work session, and we've been working on it.
But forgetting numbers for a second, it seems to me that a plan that would be, that at least I would like to understand is to do the step increases for those that qualify July 1. Then, and they start the year that way. And then when the money from the state becomes available on or about December 1, then you've got to make some kind of an adjustment in order to capture that state money. However, whatever the requirements, that seems to me
It's
to
just
be
a
the
new
plan.
scale. It's a new scale.
And I think it's a scale adjustment is all
It's
it
a new
is.
scale.
But the point is that if we're doing it on the baseline as of June 30th versus the baseline as of November 30th, that's gonna be a lot more money, and that's gonna be permanent.
That's why I say, you do whatever needs to be done to capture the 2% money from the state. We don't know what the
But
rules
that
of
would
that
be,
are.
Understand.
yet.
that could be 2% minus the 1.3 we've already given, or it could be 2 in addition to the 1 to 1.3 we've already given.
And we don't know the answer to that.
And that's that other,
I'm still processing.
You need a new hard drive, Brian.
Turn your switch off here.
Get away from that Commodore 64, okay?
Yeah, really.
Let me make a suggestion.
Alternate control delete.
Yeah, need to reboot. Why don't we do this, because it sounds like there may be a path forward. Let me characterize it there.
Oh, there will be a path forward.
Oh, we've seen a number of paths forward already.
Path forward, but there's a troll under the bridge.
Is that with Dr. Tanner and I, the four of us, President and Alex, kind of work through maybe what some scenarios would be or options or things. Understanding the school board hasn't had a chance to react to
This
this.
has not been discussed.
And you all's next meeting is Monday.
Yes, it is.
And ours is Tuesday. And the budget and everything would be in a position for the board to adopt the budget that's been advertised or an amendment, as long as we don't go above. Well, the tax rates, those are set. So there may be another time for us to come back in kind of a cool collected way of working through, I think, what Mr. White was saying, and.
I would like to get a relative concurrence on the existing plan, so they know that they're working at least with that. I mean, that's the 122, shifted from the 311. That's,
Yeah, I mean, I'm okay with it, but I think it's not the end of the movie.
well, okay, I mean, but I think that's a starting point, so that they know that, if they come back with something else that's $500,000, we'll say, I'm sorry, you know. But if they come back with something else, we can discuss it. But I think they ought to at least know that, we're okay with shifting the, 122 of that 311.
Yeah, like I said, I don't have a
Mark?
problem with shifting some, but not all, because.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
It
That's
digs a very
just-
deep hole.
Just
all
what
the
they
way around.
presented tonight.
Right, and maybe to restate that, the option that does that uses that 122 and, whatever that amount it worked out to be is option one, let's just call that option one. And then working through these other options that can come back on, and, I'm sure Dr. Tanner and Mr. Bryan will be available next Tuesday to explain what the school board would work through. And that's right, and I forgot,
It's a test that,
and I
what
forgot
it
you
was
are-
tomorrow for us?
and I forgot you all are on spring break this week.
All
And I
offices
just-
are closed for
just
now.
now,
Mark, are you okay
We will
with
get
that?
what we've done, what we.
Yeah, I mean,
As a first option? I mean, I know we need more to do anything more.
yeah, I guess,
I'm okay with it, I don't know that it helps the school.
yeah, that's what I don't really understand. I mean,
Well, I
we're
mean,
basically
it's-
saying,
it's-
we're okay with this, but go back and work on it some more. So, I mean,
Well,
that doesn't really make a lot of sense.
What I'm saying is that, we're not gonna say you can't have that 122 for operations. I don't wanna be in that, I don't wanna put them in that situation.
And I also would
Good.
add that whatever, if we're confident that the insurance number is going to be lower, whatever that calculation adds, I'd say that can flow into operating, I mean, it is an operating now.
When will we know that, Glenda?
I will, email her right now, because, I mean, I was supposed to have it already, I just.
Okay.
Okay.
One other information point here.
Yeah,
The
80
board-
grand is 80
the board
grand.
can separate the action of approving the budget from adopting the tax rates, so that we've got, get bills out and meet certain statutory guidelines with getting the tax rates. I don't see any reason why you couldn't be in a position to adopt the tax rates that have been advertised next Tuesday and defer adopting the budget until maybe the 26th of April. I know you got contracts to get out and such.
Well, and quite frankly, until veto day,
What's veto day? What's
the
it? 20th, okay.
So,
Well, I think we're probably faced with amending the budget no matter what.
well, or you
And
adopt
so
the
maybe
budget
that,
and
you
amend
adopt
it.
it and you amend it as, when you have more information. I mean, that's probably what we're stuck with, frankly.
Which would say, don't rush, we do everything on Tuesday, next Tuesday, if the board's prepared, and then prepared to come back for an amendment, or where we stand on the 26th, April 26th.
Okay.
Well, do we gain anything by adopting the budget on the 12th as opposed to the 26th?
The,
On the tax rate, you
I'm
got,
looking through, tax rates you'll need to adopt. I'm looking at Glenda, is there any difference between?
I don't think it's really gonna be any difference at this point, because, we were using the code section to do our budget calendar that, was, intended for when your reassessment results in new revenue beyond 1%. That didn't turn out to be the case, so that was the code section that had the April 15th deadline in it, so I think we could go to the 26th if you.
For tax rates as well?
Well,
If we could, I'd rather do tax rates at least. Get
Yeah,
the-
tax rate.
Oh, you're just talking the budget?
Yeah, I'm just talking budget. I mean, I don't
Okay.
see any point in adopting the budget and then coming back and amending it.
Okay.
Unless we
Why
have
not
to,
just
right?
wait until the 26th? That'll be the other side of veto day, and
Okay.
we'll sort of know what all the pieces are
But
there.
understand the tax rates, if you're prepared, you can do that.
Yeah, tax rate on the 12th, budget on 26th.
Okay.
Yes, sir. That sounds like my recommendation.
You take the computers.
Do we have any more questions for Representatives Brenda and Alex? I thought we were pretty kind to you. We weren't.
You were. You
We
were
just,
very
but we
kind.
were asking a lot of questions and stuff we just didn't know, and
It's quite
some of
all right.
which you don't know either.
Well, it's quite all right, that's the way our cycle has been, and then we work with it so much,
All right.
but it doesn't hurt any of us to have nice mental exercises at the end of the day.
And the nice thing is more like the ACT rather than the SAT. You don't get penalized.
It
for
was
the
very
essay.
subject matter oriented, I'll give you that.
Well, and I think we're trying to be helpful, we're trying to
Yes, you
see
are.
what can be,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
what can
Well,
work.
and we've worked, very hard in looking at this request. We know, what your position was initially with the 511, and, worked very hard not to come back and say, okay, we have all the 511 over there, so we have worked to make
All
some
right.
cuts to make this work, but, we appreciate this.
And I'll just want to add, the level of communication and responsiveness, at least with Dr. Tanner and everybody between us has made this much more, I guess, proactive and collaborative process than
All right.
sometimes I've experienced in the past, for sure.
I do have one question, irrelevant of this difference when we lost the 800. And how much did we actually lose after they did all their mission around? Because I'm writing an article for Lake Currents, and I'd like to take the state to task.
Yeah, let us get that for you. When you go back to
That's fine, if you
the
can just-
400 and some,
Yeah, just send me
you'll see
something.
but we had to shift, the way they've done it, it's just, it's really interesting to see that you had something that was in general aid. So we lost, if you look at our budget right now, and I'm just picturing it, so I'm visual, I can see it, you lose a substantial amount in basic aid. Now, so you'll see you're losing $100,000 in basic aid, which part of the no loss was to offset. But then you see now there's something in lottery, but it has conditions with it. And then you see they also made some changes in some other items that are general in the basic aid category that are now in lottery. So it's not as clear as it might be, but we can run figures too to see. And then, of course, we've been running everything we're doing now on that caboose bill, which was with the assumption that the 800 was gone. So.
But looked at in a certain reasonable light, we lost 800,000. Because those things that we picked up weren't necessarily because we lost the 800, were they? They were stuff we maybe would have picked up anyway.
Well, that's what's hard about it, is because with the governor, the budget, the 800 captured a lot of dollars for these divisions. Now it's been put back out in a couple of different areas. One mainly in the lottery, the $5 per student calculation, which they run through a composite index. So we did get that back, but the truth be known, it's very difficult to see exactly where all the dollars flowed from what one budget was into.
I may just blame them on the 800,000 and
Yeah.
leave it at that.
And I'm sure
But we
that
can
was
give you
totally
the
by
info,
design,
we can give
too.
you the information, because that was truly in lottery, and we can show you the difference in lottery.
Okay, all
I
right.
think the difference in lottery is approximately, now, it's late, but I wanna say it's around $155,000, $157,000 that we're showing in lottery. Now,
Okay.
if the budget goes through, there's a significant increase per pupil in lottery next year, but that's for everybody in the state.
All right,
So we can give you that number.
thank you, Brenda.
Sounds like laundering.
All right.
Move from one place to the other.
Mr. Chairman,
Okay.
members of the board, you had a work session scheduled for Thursday evening.
Do we have any more, any other items on the budget that we want to discuss tonight?
I'm content with it.
then do we need a work session for Thursday?
It sounds like we won't have any new information by Thursday.
Okay,
Sounds like we could work.
so
So
let's,
if you all would, I guess, motion to cancel that.
so do I get a motion?
So moved.
Second, all right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Work session for Thursday has been canceled.
And we'll put this under, as an adoption item, the tax rate, and, I guess we'll, for the tax rates next Tuesday, and then we'll defer the budget until, April 26th.
All right.
That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, get a motion?
So that we provide clarity, I make a motion that we adjourn the meeting, having no further business.
And I would second that we adjourn the work session.
Any further discussion? No?
It's too slow.
All in favor?